All right, so our next section we're getting into here is new project creation and navigation for the PanelView Plus in FTView View Studio. So there are two potential methods where you can create a new application. So the first method I show in images 1 and 2, and it would be to open Studio itself, select Machine Edition. So if you have Studio Enterprise, it will show up with all the ones that I have in the image here. If you have Studio for Machine Edition only, then it will only open the Machine Edition for you, so that first screen will look a little bit different. But the second screen will still look the same, and is where you will give the name of the application that you are working with. You will select the resolution, but that is the physical hardware. So as you go through there, you'll pick the hardware that you have. If you are on a PanelView Plus 7, like I said, there are limitations between the standard and the performance. And by using this setup right here, you can pick and tell the application it is standard or performance. If you do pick the wrong one, you can change it later. But that is what you would do if you wanted to use the traditional method, which is using View Studio to launch it. The other option, which I showed in our previous seminar with the Studio 5000 basics, you can also launch it from Studio 5000. So opening Studio 5000, you'd select FTView, and you would pick the hardware that you are using, give it the name. So by selecting the hardware, it knows the resolution, same thing. And then it automatically puts two separate folders for the standard versus performance for you. But they are the same screen. So 2 and 3 are identical creation. But one thing I do want to highlight, and if you're used to selecting the revision for Studio 5000, right, because the controller and Studio 5000 revision must match, you always have to pick the revision. For FTView View Studio, you do not need to select the revision when creating the project. So it is best or most common for people to create it with a newer revision or equal to, and then it can create an older firmware revision application for you. It has that ability. So that part is very different from the PLC and Studio 5000. So once you create a project, it will open up and it'll look just like the screenshot that I have here. So you have your Project Explorer, which has everything, which is very, very similar, right, to the Studio 5000. Inside there, though, you have a couple of key areas that we always try to focus on. You have your system folder. Your system folder really has all your external setup and configuration. So it'll have security for the runtime. If you do need to change the panel view, it would be set in the project settings of the system because you're changing the hardware. Global connections are the ability to read and write information detailed about the panel view itself. So not the application, but about the panel view. So IP address, time and date, things along that nature, which screen you're on. Those are all your global connections. And then your startup. So the startup is what screen do you want to use on startup, if you want to have audit logging, and a couple things along that nature. The next primary folder is your HMI tags. So there are two different ways you can address PLC. You can create HMI tags, which allows you to import and export. So it's kind of a good feature if you want to bulk edit your content. The other option is for direct referencing. So direct referencing will not show up in your HMI tags, but on the individual graphics. So inside the Graphic Explorer itself, you would open up a display. And on the display, you can tie those directly to an object or a tag name straight in the PLC. Now the syntax gets a little weird because you have to have brackets around your topic or your communication path. And that, so some people don't like to see that on the display. They would prefer to see just a normal tag name, and then therefore you need an HMI tag separately. That's really a preference thing depending on who you're talking to. The next thing is your alarms setup. So as I discussed in our previous seminar with Studio 5000, the newer platforms allow for tag-based alarming. For FTView Machine Edition, it does not natively grab those alarms. So you would have to set up your alarms still individually. So what I would do is I would recommend creating one alarm, browsing and getting it set up, then exporting your alarm, which you can't, your alarm event database there. Once you export your alarm, you could quickly modify it all in Excel by adding all your tags from an export that you can export out of the controller. Bring that and then re-import that back in. So that now you are attached to the extended tag properties to allow you to use that tag-based alarming. And the last and potentially one of the most important tabs is your communications. So you have two different places where you can access it. You could either open up FactoryTalk Links and double-click communications, or you can just select the communications tab. But that is where you will create what they would call a topic, but it is giving the PLC a name and a path for the panel view to communicate to it. We'll cover that in a lot more detail when we get into our actual application. But the next thing would be, how do you set up those communications? So if you did open up FactoryTalk Links and double click on that communication setup, as of version 11, each application can have its own configuration. So you get this prompt, the first prompt here that I have my mouse going around. On every version prior to version 11, you have one setup that you would set up using either the admin console or our FactoryTalk Links, if it is new enough for that. That's where your configuration would be. So for version 11, you'll get this prompt where you can create a new configuration, import a configuration, or copy an existing from some other running station. Most of the time, if you are doing the development, you will be creating a new one. If you have a existing project and you already restored it, then you will probably not get this prompt. It depends on, if you restored a full backup file or a runtime, things along that nature. But once you get that open, it will open up the window that's the smaller one with the highlight around the word PLC. So by default, this will be blank, and you will have to type in what do you want to call your PLC. So if you have multiple controllers, you obviously do not want to use the shortcut just PLC, but instead you want to name the PLC on what the device actually is. Then you would point it to the Ethernet driver or whatever form of communications you're using. If you have the performance, you could be using serial DF1 communications. Most of the time, though, you're still going to be using Ethernet at this point, or hopefully you will be using Ethernet at this point. And then you will just point it to the PLC. So in this snippet that I took here, I actually had a SLIC 505 connected to my system at the time. But that tag shortcut is very important. You need to make sure that you have that set up. And we will be going through that configuration and setup when we do our demonstration in a little bit. The other thing you can do, sounds a little bit weird with the new style, but FactoryTalk Links browser can be used. And if you look here in the bottom right corner, you can browse through to a controller and assign a configuration to that controller. By doing that, it will automatically populate this for you. I wouldn't recommend really doing it very much, just for the simple fact that you might forget what you named it or things along that nature. So it's just nice to configure it actually in the software when it's important. So the next thing you do, once you have your project all created and you now have your communications set up to the PLC, you'll want to create the application. So there's actually two ways you can do it. The first is by selecting the button that I have highlighted here. The other one would be to hit the application button, and there's a drop down, and then hit create runtime. At that point, you'll get this screen that pops up where you'll be able to create a new application. And again, this is where you will select which revision or which firmware you have on the panel view. So I have 11 installed on the computer that we are using for the demonstration. So by default, it will pick 11, but in the event I needed to change it to 10 because we have not updated the firmware for some reason, that is where I can say, okay, even though I used version 11 to create the application, I can now create it or make the runtime, so not the full application, but just the runtime in version 10 and transfer that. The other thing, well, here would be to allow conversion. So if you are creating it in 11, the full application in 11, but you want to make the runtime in 10, I recommend always allowing conversion. If you never allow or password protect it to help keep the code safe for you, it can lead to you have to keep track of that password, and there is no way around it. If you ever put never allow, there is no way you will ever restore that runtime. You have to make sure you keep a backup of the full application. So in my recommendations, I always leave the allow conversion option selected. There are certain instances where you'd want to do it, but I would pick conversion protection at the worst. Again, very similar to Studio 5000, but not the same for every other platform, is the upload and download. So download, again, is taking the information from our PC and storing it onto the panel view. Upload will be taking the runtime application. So it's not the full build application, but just the runtime. And it takes the runtime from the panel view and brings it back up to your computer so that you can restore that computer or that application. Instead of a simple upload download button, Machine Edition uses a transfer utility. So the transfer utility will show up inside of Machine Edition by selecting the icon I have in the top left corner. And then you have your upload and download. For the Machine Edition version 11, on the right hand side there, you can see the application version. So it will tell you which version you are either uploading or going to be downloading. So it's kind of a nice feature just so you understand where it came from. And it gives you the ability to determine where you write the information to, whether you want that to be the startup application, if you are replacing the communication, and then if you are deleting the log files because you are wiping the panel view and want to put a whole new application in there. So it gives you all that capability. The transfer utility is also its own standalone application. So you can go to the start menu and press transfer utility, and it will pop up and give you just that shortcut to that window without needing to load Studio.